Welcome to the MLB Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo, JGilbo11, taking a look at some offensive players for today's slate, looking at where to head to some ballparks and find some damage. And really, there's quite a few options to look at tonight, in addition to a lot of pitchers to stay away from. Jumping right in, I think 7:05, you're looking at Marcus Stroman, Mike Wright. 8.5 over/under here in Camden Yards, so it's favorable for both sides of the plate, really for lefties. But obviously, those Toronto right-handed bats are going to enjoy Camden Yards as well. You're looking at Mike Wright, a reverse splits guy. He's led a 353 WOBA in his short time in the big so far. With a 1.73 home runs per nine, has just a 33.7% ground ball rate. So really, you can look at paying up for those Toronto bats. Obviously, Josh Donaldson, Troy Tulowitzki being the cheaper of them, but still has some pop from the right side. Jose Bautista in play for me. Edwin Encarnacion. They are expensive on FanDuel, so you do have that to pay for. But there are some cheap options if you want to pay down at pitchers to work them into your lineup. So really looking there. Of course, you can look at Chris Davis still in GPPs. Always has that big time upside against right-handers. Favorable spot in Camden Yards. But overall, I mean, Stroman is a guy who can be prone to giving up hits and home runs at times, but overall is a pretty quality right arm. On a full game slate, I'm probably going to limit my exposure to this Baltimore side, but I don't mind them in GPPs. I don't mind Machado, Chris Davis, kind of the obvious two there. Next game, you got 7:05. You got Athletics and the Yankees. Eric Surkamp, lefty on the hill versus Michael Pineda. Pineda is a guy who does keep the ball in the park. He's also tougher on right-handers, but looking at lefties, they did have a 327 WOBA off them last year, 1.02 home runs per nine. Obviously any lefty in Yankee Stadium is going to be a decent spot. You can look at Josh Reddick, very cheap, 3,600 on DraftKings, 3,300 on FanDuel, so a little bit more expensive there, not quite the value he carries over from DK. He's in play. Obviously, Stephen Vogt is in play, a very cheap catcher to look at tonight. I don't mind him in this spot. Really, I mean, more so GPP's plays on this Oakland side because Pineda is more than capable of shutting down an offense, but I don't mind some of the Oakland lefties in this spot tonight. 327 WOBA, very average, so I think you can definitely look there. As far as Surkamp goes, you can look at some of the Yankees bats. Alex Rodriguez comes to name, depending on where he's hitting in the lineup. Teixeira, some of those switch hitters, Carlos Beltran as well. Kind of interesting plays there. As far as Ellsbury and Gardner and McCann go, not really looking at them tonight, so I think you can stay away. 7:05, Logan Veray, Vincent Velasquez, over under 7. Neither one I really want to pick on with offense. Logan Veray would be my target, if anything, but obviously those Phillies offense is dreadful, so really staying away from that game as far as hitters go. 7:10, you got Rays and the Red Sox, over under of 8. Drew Smyly versus Joe Kelly. Joe Kelly, obviously reverse splits guy, 373 WOBA to right-handers over the last season. 1.41 home runs per nine. You got Fenway out there, the Green Monster, just 310 away. Longoria in play for me. You're looking at Forzier, who's in a good spot as well up top. Outside of that, I mean, those are the really two names that stand out to me. You can look at Souza still in GPPs. If he's in the lineup tonight, I know he was out Sunday dealing with an injury, so keep an eye on him. But he would be in play for tournaments. Geyer, if he's hitting up top, is a cheap guy to consider. Really, I mean, you can pick on Joe Kelly. You never know which one you're going to get. We have seen him at times be good and shut down an offense, and we have seen him at times just get absolutely rocked. So I think you can definitely look at all the Tampa right-handed bats as far as all formats go. On the Red Sox side of things, they do have some guys who hit righty or who hit lefties well. Drew Smyly, more than capable arm. He has a lot of 303 WOBA over the last season here. 2 right-handed bats and does have a 25% strikeout rate. So this guy can miss some bats. He also can give up some home runs, 1.72 home runs per 9 over the last season. And that puts guys like Dustin Pedroia in play for me. I think he's a cheap option to look at tonight. He's always a guy who hits lefties, fairly well. Hanley is another one that I like. Mookie Betts up top, and obviously Bogarts. Bogarts really came into his own against left-handers, and that 3,900 price tag is really cheap on DraftKings. I really like him a lot there as a kind of a drop-down option from some of those top names. On DraftKings, he's a little bit more, or on FanDuel, he's a little bit more expensive, but really looking at him there. I think he's one of my favorite shortstop plays tonight. 7-10 here, you're looking at Alex Wood, Julio Teheran. Yes, both have pitched well in Atlanta, but also both have pitched pretty awful for most of their careers. And I think, you're looking at these Dodger lefties. Obviously, Teheran over the last season in a month or so, 392 WOBA to lefties, 1.94 home runs per 9. Seager, Peterson, Gonzalez, you name it. I mean, these guys are going to be a safe place tonight. Utley, if he's sitting at the top of the lineup. So really, you can look at all these bats, and really in all formats tonight. They're all in a great spot. As far as the other side goes, Alex Wood, a lot of 343 WOBA, 2 right-handers last year. Not a ton of right-handed bats I like to target on this Atlanta side. Adonis Garcia is a guy who catches my eye just because he's hitting cleanup, going to get the righty-lefty matchup. Pretty cheap price tag. It would only be really forced into my laps if I was paying up at both pitcher spots on DK or paying up on FanDuel. So I think they're better options, but I think if you want to be contrarian, he's still worth a look. 7-10, you got Jorge De La Rosa and Robert Stevenson. 8.5 over/under. It was originally Alfredo Simon, but you can still target these Colorado lefties. Really looking at Carlos Gonzalez as a guy to pay up for. Ben Paulson, another one. Nolan Arenado still, even with the righty-righty match, the guy's absolutely mashing right now. One guy that I really like on that side is still Trevor Story. I mean, the guy's absolutely crushing baseballs, and in this ballpark, it enhances power from both sides. He's just become one of my favorite GPP options. I can't quite pay up for him in cash games, but I still think he's definitely worth a look in tournaments, of course. So he would be in play for me. DJ LeMahieu, if he sneaks back into lineup, he was out yesterday, would be in play. He'd be a guy to take a look at. On that red side, you can look at Zach Cozart, Eugenio Suarez, if they're both in the lineup. Devin Mesoraco, still a punt catcher option with some pop. I actually don't mind Jorge De La Rosa tonight. I think he's an interesting GPP play, but I also think the Reds do have some bats that can get to him if they can. Those are the names that will do it. Votto, obviously, a lefty-lefty matchup, but can still hit him well. So GPPs-wise, I still think Votto's a decent play. So like yesterday, we still see a pretty high Vegas total, but there wasn't a ton of offensive production outside of Ben Paulson yesterday. So I'll be heading back there tonight. I think there's going to be a little bit more runs from both sides there. 7-10, you got Nationals and Marlins, Steven Strasburg, Adam Conley. Neither I like picking on. You can look at some of the Nationals bats, but overall they've been pretty dreadful this season outside of Harper and Murphy there. Guys like Zimmerman, worth a look in tournaments. Rendon as well. Taylor, they have the righty-lefty matchup. Not a favorable ballpark being in Miami, and I don't expect a ton of runs. Wilson Ramos, a cheap catcher I like. He's hit lefties well in his career. He's an interesting play if you want to go cheap. That's about it from this game. Obviously, you're not attacking Steven Strasburg in this game, in this ballpark. I just think on a full slate, there are far better options to look at. Next one here, you got Tigers and Royals, Shane Green, Yordano Ventura. And Ventura is a guy who can be tough on right-handers. We've seen it for the most part throughout his career. He does have a pretty high walk rate, though, but he is a guy who keeps the ball in the park. Tigers' prices don't intrigue me in this matchup, but the Royals ones do, just because Shane Green's a lot of 415 WOBA to lefties over the last season, just 42 innings, 1.07 home runs per 9. Doesn't miss a lot of bats, 11.2% strikeout rate, 35% hard ball rate. So, looking at this one, it's not a bad option. You're looking at Moustakas, Hosmer, Kendrys Morales, Alex Gordon. All solid plays. Obviously, Kane still in GPPs. If you want a cheap shortstop, I'll see this Escobar leading off if you're hoping for the full Kansas City stack. 4.5 run total there for Kansas City, so they are expecting some runs, and I am as well. Next one here, you got Astros and Rangers. This one over under a 9, your highest over under of the night. Expecting a ton of runs here in Global Life Park. I like these names on both sides. You're looking at Scott Feldman attacking with some bats here. It's a lot of 346 Woba 2 right-handers. He's been a bit tougher on lefties in his career, but I still don't think he's a strong arm by any means. A lot of 301 Woba, doesn't miss a ton of bats, average ground ball rate. So really, you can look at guys like Prince Fielder in GPP, still a pretty cheap price tag. Nomar Mazara going to be a staple cash game guy for a lot of people tonight. Beltre, although it's not a lefty, still worth a look with those reverse splits for Feldman. Mitch Moreland in play as well if you want to get really contrarian. He's shown some pop every now and then. Overall, I mean, this Texas team is kind of boomer bust, so I wouldn't really lean on them too much in cash games, but I think GPP wise, you can definitely get some shares in. As far as the other side goes, you're looking at Derek Holland against this Astros team, probably going to be in for some trouble. Is allowed a 347 Woba to right-handed bats going back to last year, 1.74 home runs per 9. That just means, all those right-handed guys. Jose Altuve, obviously a top second base play tonight. George Springer, Carlos Correa, Tyler White, Evan Gattis, Carlos Gomez. A lot of right-handed bats in favorable spots. Just going to be dependent on how many you can fit in. They do carry some expensive price tags with them, especially Altuve, 5,200 on DraftKings. Obviously, he's been crushing coming out of the gates here. White, an interesting GPP play. Cheaper first baseman option, 4,200 on DK. I like that price tag. Just 3,000 on FanDuel and a good spot hitting fifth. So interesting play. He might even slide up to fourth depending on what they do with Rasmus. So really like that game. Really like the Astros side. This next one, 8-10 Angels, White Sox, two offenses. The Angels put up some runs last night, but they did it with just one extra base hit, and they did it with the bottom of their lineup. So even when they put up runs, they still find a way to disappoint you. They're facing Matt Latos, who has shown a little bit of an improvement through 2 games so far this season. A guy I'm still prone to picking on just because I'm not a big fan. Has allowed a 325 Woba to lefties over the last season. This Angels team doesn't have a ton of left-handers. If Rafael Ortega, he's a cheap guy to look at tonight as far as a punt play. Cole Calhoun as well. Always a big fan of him in hitters' ballparks. You're looking at U.S. Cellular being fair ball from both sides. Obviously, Trout, always a GPP play. As far as this other side goes, Matt Shoemaker, a big-time home run threat. He has a ton, 1.74 home runs per 9, 2 right-handed bats last year with a 341 Woba. And that puts Jose Abreu in GPP territory. Todd Frazier's prices come down a little bit in comparison to last night. Those two I'm looking for some big power from tonight. As far as from the left side, Schumacher was pretty tough on lefties last year. Still allowed the homers, 1.40 home runs per 9. Adam Eaton, Jimmy Rollins, depending on their line spots, Melky Cabrera. You can look at 1 through 5 in this spot here, and I think it's a pretty good option in all formats. I think you're going to see some runs, unlike last night when the White Sox were a little bit disappointing against Santiago there. Cubs Cardinals, this one does have some weather concerns. Jason Hamill on the hill. You can look at the Cardinals lefties in GPPs. Hamill's still not a guy I feel completely comfortable picking on. A lot of 304 Woba to right-handers. Doesn't have a good ground ball rate, but does keep the ball in the yard. Didn't give up a 34% hard ball rate to lefties last year, so that is something to keep an eye on. Guys like Carpenter, Hazel Baker, they're in play. You can look at Wall. Down low if you need a cheap second baseman. Obviously, Brandon Moss. I'm not expecting a ton of runs out of this game. As far as the Cubs side goes, Garcia coming off a great outing. Cubs going to be one of those boomer bust offenses tonight because if you look, they have a 26% strikeout rate against southpaws. But they also have guys like Fowler, who hits lefties well. Rizzo managed to hit lefties well last season. Obviously, Chris Bryant, Addison Russell, Jorge Soler, some bats. Javier Baez is probably going to sneak into the lineup tonight. So they do have some pop. Obviously, they have an offense that's arguably the best in the bigs. So you're kind of having trouble, not leaning on them. But I think Weather and Garcia aside, that kind of puts them in GPP territory for me tonight. Pirates and Padres, you're looking at one of the lower scoring games of the night. Obviously, Colin Ray is a favorable target. I'm not picking on Liriano one bit. But Ray, on the other hand, if you're kind of hoping for some Pirates offense in Petco here, obviously it's a pitcher's park. It's likely going to come from the top of the order with Marte, McCutchen, For a team that does have some decent bats, they're kind of broken up, which is kind of frustrating. Obviously, you have Jaso up top, then you got Freese and Cervelli in there, so it's not like you can throw a McCutchen, Marte, Polanco stack in there. Harrison's a cheap guy, like at the bottom of the order. I really don't mind him hitting 7th for Pittsburgh. I do think a lot of the runs are going to come from the Pittsburgh side, and I think there is going to be some decent value. So I think if you wanted to be really contrarian tonight and be off a game that no one's going to target, you should look that way. Last one of the night here, Diamondbacks and Giants, Robbie Ray, Matt Cain. Obviously, you got the lefty on the hill for Arizona there, and Ray allowed a 322 WOBA to right-handers over the last season. Keeps the ball in the park. Obviously, he's going to keep the ball in the park tonight against an AT&T Park. But Posey, Pence, guys who can do some damage. Allowed a 37% hard ball rate to right-handers last year, so that's interesting. So I do think Posey is a decent option behind the plate. I don't think you'll be able to pay his price tag on FanDuel. 3,700 though on DraftKings isn't a bad spot against a lefty. I know it is at home, but he is cheaper than some of the other options like Tony Wolters, Salvador Perez, Brian McCann. So that puts him in a spot there. And Pence as well is not too badly priced on FanDuel at 3,300. And really on DraftKings either. So Giants do have some cheap bats. I wouldn't be afraid to target them in cash or GPPs tonight. So that's going to wrap it up here at the Slate Breakdown. Check out dailyfantasycafe.com for all our great tools and content.